what Rosalie experienced, no woman should have to experience, right? Even one case like this is unacceptable. And yet the FDA opened women up across this country to just this type of, we call it reproductive coercion and assault, because that's what it is. And it did that by taking away that requirement that abortion drugs be dispensed in person.
Welcome to Caring for Both, a curbside consult series by the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or AAPLOG. On this podcast, we bring on experts to provide insights to support you as a medical professional in your life-affirming practice and career. I'm your host for today, Dr. Christina Francis. I'm a board-certified OBGYN and also CEO at AAPLOG. And we're excited today to have the second part of our two-part episode highlighting the dangers of the dispensing of abortion pills without an in-person visit, and specifically what that has led to for pro-life states as well as for women. Hopefully you listened to our episode last week with Rosalie, a woman who had a forced abortion because of the availability of abortion pills online. And Gabby McIntyre, who's back with us today, is one of Rosalie's attorneys at the Alliance Defending Freedom. And she's back with us today to dive a little bit more into the legal aspects of this case. Just as a reminder for you all, Gabriella McIntyre serves as legal counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom Center for Life, and she earned her JD from George Mason's Antonin Scalia Law School. She is a 2017 Blackstone Fellow and a member of the DC and Colorado bars. And also, on a personal note, she was one of the team who represented APLOG in the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine in our lawsuit against the FDA over Mifepristone. Gabby, thanks for being back with us this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, so on that note, I want to start with our case against the FDA, that, we filed as physicians saying that the way that the FDA had recklessly removed safeguards from the drug mifepristone was leading to significant damages for our patients, for us as physicians of conscience. And we were grateful you and I were together at the Supreme Court on the day of oral arguments. And we really had a strong case. The lower courts had ruled in our favor on the merits of our case. And unfortunately, as people who have been regulars of this podcast know, that the Supreme Court didn't even look at the merits of our case, but decided that we as physicians did not have standing to bring that case. I know, Gabby, you and I and the team at ADF have talked, though, that even though we were obviously not happy with the Supreme Court's ruling in our case, that our case really brought this issue of the dangers of mifepristone to the national stage and I think, got people talking about it. Can you just give us your perspective on that? And then we'll dive a little bit more into this case in particular.
Yeah, of course. So I know you just mentioned Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, of course, was very disappointing blow at the Supreme Court, but there were so many blessings that did come out of it. Y'all, as you mentioned, were the first ones to actually step courageously and boldly out there to challenge the FDA's unlawful and systematic removal of safeguards, both back in 2016 and then also in 2023, even back to the approval at the beginning of the lawsuit. And you exposed, just like you said, you exposed what the FDA had been doing to a lot of folks who didn't know at the time just how accessible and how dangerous, high risk these drugs were, and what they were doing to women. And it was during that lawsuit, like you mentioned, that the Fifth Circuit twice concluded that the FDA's decision to remove, in particular, the in-person dispensing requirement and protection for abortion drugs was unlawful. So now the states are moving forward with the lawsuit, and women like Rosalie are courageously stepping in to carry the baton forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and before we get into Rosalie's case and Louisiana's case in particular, as you mentioned, we really felt like the most egregious thing that the FDA did was, amongst many egregious things, but the most egregious thing was to remove that in-person dispensing requirement. And I remember being at oral arguments at the Fifth Circuit when our case was being discussed, and one of the judges appropriately asked the FDA's lawyer, how they were screening for things, life-threatening conditions like ectopic pregnancy. And the attorney replied, well, we women are asked questions. And of course, as we know from Rosalie's case, as we're going to get into more, she was never asked any questions. But then the judge came back with, well, what kinds of questions are you asking to screen for ectopic pregnancy? And she said, well, the women are asked if they have shoulder pain. And I remember Dr. Donna Harrison, my colleague, was sitting right next to me, and she and I both gasped out loud because, of course, any medical professional listening to this will know that if a woman has shoulder pain with a ruptured ectopic pregnancy, that means she's got an abdomen full of blood and she's going to die if she doesn't get on an operating table immediately. So, I mean, this is the kind of care that women are, quote unquote care that women are receiving in this country today when they're being given mifepristone online with no interaction with a medical professional. People often say telemedicine abortions, and I think they have in their mind that that means a woman like Rosalie is sitting down at her computer talking to a physician. Of course, that is not what's happening. It's so dangerous, and it really disregards I think the value of women in this country and the kind of care that they deserve. Um, so jumping off of that, can you tell us why Alliance Defending Freedom decided to take Rosalie's case along with the state of Louisiana? Maybe explain a little bit how those two interact, and how pervasive do you think this problem is? As we talked about last week with Rosalie, we know there's news reports she's not the only one, but what do you all think as far as how pervasive this problem likely is?
Yeah. So just to unpack that a little bit, I mean, what Rosalie experienced, no woman should have to experience, right? Even one case like this is unacceptable. And yet the FDA opened women up across this country to just this type of, we call it reproductive coercion and assault, because that's what it is. And it did that by taking away that requirement that abortion drugs be dispensed in person. And so what that decision did in 2023, when they made it permanent, was to make these abortion drugs available by the mail. And now, like you mentioned, at the click of a few buttons, anyone, and I literally mean anyone, can impersonate a pregnant woman and within 2 days be sent in the mail an FDA approved abortion drug to do with what they please. And you mentioned the horrible stories that we're hearing, the pain that women are going through because of these experiences, because these drugs are so easy for bad actors to get their hands on. These drugs that are already high risk, right? You've been over this several times about how high risk these drugs are. And the FDA even admitted that when you take away that in-person dispensing requirement, the risks go up because, as you mentioned, you can't screen for ectopic pregnancies. You can't determine whether a woman is even pregnant or what gestational age her baby is. There's no way to do those things because you're not actually speaking with a doctor. And so what the FDA has done here in this instance is it's enabled these bad actors to get their hands on this already high-risk drug, and all because the Biden FDA wanted to undermine the Dobbs decision and circumvent the pro-life laws in states like Louisiana, who are respecting or who respect the sanctity of life and decided after Dobbs to pass pro-life laws. So you asked about the crossover, how does that relate to Louisiana's case? Well, the Dobbs decision, as you know, it overruled Roe versus Wade, and it gave that issue of abortion back to the people in its elected representatives, aka the states. So the issue of how to regulate abortion, that went back to the states. And Louisiana passed some of this nation's strongest pro-life protections. Abortion in Louisiana is all but prohibited except for in very narrow circumstances. And they chose, through their elected representatives, to protect the unborn. And yet, and this is a staggering reality, there are more abortions in the state of Louisiana now than before Dobbs. And that's the case across the country. And it's because of these mail order abortions. They're allowing these bad actors, they're allowing these abortion activists and doctors in other states to send in the mail these abortion drugs illegally into states that prohibit them. And the Society of Family Planning, that is a pro-abortion organization, they have this report that comes out. It's called the We Count report. And it reports straight from the abortion lobby's mouth how many abortion drugs are being sent illegally into states where abortion is illegal, where pro-life states where they're trying to protect the unborn and to protect women. And it said that in December of 2024 alone, there were upwards of 800 abortions via the mail happening in the state of Louisiana. Every single one of those reported abortions via abortion drugs was illegal. And as we know from Rosalie's story, also some were unwanted. So this is the reality that the FDA created for avowedly political reasons, regardless of the risks to women's safety and regardless of what this would do in the legal landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so devastating to me to think of the harms that are being caused, the lives that are being lost, not just babies, but women. We know that women have died from taking these drugs. There was a teenager, I believe, in the state of Louisiana whose mother obtained these drugs
That's
from an
right.
abortionist in New York and forced them on her daughter who did not want them. So these are not, as you said, not isolated cases. These are just the ones that we know of, and we know that this has to be happening on an even larger scale. And I think this issue oftentimes is so politically divisive, and people are very entrenched on their chosen sides of this issue, and I certainly understand that. But really, this is an issue that should cross that line of division. Whether somebody is pro-choice or pro-life, we all should agree that, one, this is not good for women to have forced abortions, to have um, abortions done in an even more dangerous way. Not that they're ever safe at their baseline, but even more dangerous. And for those who think that the federal government should stay out of the issue of abortion and that it should be left up to the states, this is essentially a federal mandate that is superseding every single state law, because the FDA said these drugs could be dispensed without an in-person visit. And as you said, then that's negating every state's pro-life law. For those, like even my home state of Indiana, we're seeing it. My group sees complications of these drugs on a regular basis, despite the fact that abortion is largely illegal in the state of Indiana. Um, can you also, I know that there are other lawsuits that are sort of in progress in the country over mifepristone. And for people who have been following along with the progress of our case and this case, can you just give us an update too on what does the rest of the legal landscape look like right now in this country regarding mifepristone?
Mhm. Yeah, so the states that had originally intervened in the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine case, right before the Supreme Court kicked it back down, they are continuing their lawsuit in the state of Missouri. And we actually had attempted, on behalf of the state of Louisiana and Rosalie, to intervene in that case before it was transferred over to Missouri. So that actually opened the door for us to then have our own standalone lawsuit on behalf of Louisiana. Um, we are so um, thankful to be able to stand with the state of Louisiana that's trying to protect the unborn in their state, trying to protect women like Rosalie. And we're very proud to stand alongside Rosalie as well. There was an unfortunate ruling out of a Hawaii district court recently. It's kind of the opposite, trying to do the opposite of what our lawsuits are attempting to accomplish, and that's pro-abortion activists are trying to completely scrap the REMS. They're trying to get rid of the existing and the only remaining safeguards, which there aren't many, as you well know. And they're attempting to do that from the other side. So currently we have this landscape where we have states that are trying to enforce their pro-life laws as the Dobbs decision promised they would be able to do, and they should be able to do. And yet the FDA, through the Biden administration, attempted and has succeeded in circumventing that decision. And like you said, by executive fiat, essentially creating a 50-state abortion drug economy. These drugs are high risk. They need safeguards. The FDA has admitted since the beginning that these drugs are high risk and they need safeguards. They attempted to rely on studies they said were not adequate to remove the safeguards in 2023, that you had to have an in-person dispensing visit in order to get the drugs. And they relied on the lack of data, which, of course, as you know, the Fifth Circuit said this is an ostrich's head in the sand approach to rulemaking, that they got rid of a reporting requirement and then used that absence of data to try to justify saying that, well, without the in-person dispensing protection, these drugs are still safe. So you have a twice concluded, a court that twice concluded that the FDA's actions were unlawful. So we're very confident in the merits of our lawsuit. We're very confident that getting the word out there about Rosalie's story will help people realize the dangers of this mail order abortion drug scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so amazing to me. I want to go back to something that you said about the FDA putting its head in the sand just like an ostrich. Because of course, as we highlighted, I think very well, very significantly in our case, that in 2016 they removed the complication reporting requirement and said you only have to tell us about deaths. And then when they made these changes, they said, well, look, we made all these changes in 2016 and it didn't increase complications, of course, because they weren't requiring reporting. But for any of us who are in clinical medicine, we know because we're seeing it. We have seen the complications continue to increase because women are not, as you said, not being screened for ectopic pregnancy, not being screened for how far along they are in their pregnancy. I have several colleagues who have taken care of women who took these drugs well into their second trimester because they were not being seen in person before taking them. And I remember, back when the American College of OBGYNs started to advocate for these no visit abortions, shamefully, really shamefully, because it's medical malpractice. I remember bringing up to one of my pro-choice colleagues, I said, would you ever, if a patient just called you and said, I'm 8 weeks along and I'm pretty sure I'm having a miscarriage because I've had a little bit of bleeding, would you ever just call her in medicate if she said, I want to treat it with medication? Would you ever just call in those medications without seeing her, without doing any labs, without doing an ultrasound? And she said, absolutely not. That would be malpractice. Why on earth would I do that? And I pointed out to her that that's exactly what's being advocated for here. And she recognized that that is so below the standard of care that there's no way she would ever do that. And so I think it's real. Again, I just want to point out to anybody listening to this or watching this who doesn't consider themselves pro-life, but just think about, is this the kind of care that we really think women deserve in this country? Absolutely not. And as you said, these states have a right to defend the laws that many of them worked so hard to pass to protect the citizens of their state. And so it's so important that these lawsuits keep going forward. Can you tell us specifically in this lawsuit, what are you asking of the courts? Because I know each lawsuit has a little bit of a different ask of the courts. So what are you asking of the courts as a result of this lawsuit?
So this lawsuit in particular, the state of Louisiana and Rosalie versus the FDA, we are focused primarily and exclusively on the 2023 changes to the risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. That includes creating this abortion by mail scheme. So what we're asking is for that in-person dispensing protection to be reinstated so that we don't have mail order abortions, so that the state of Louisiana and any pro-life state that is trying to protect the unborn will be able to enforce their laws and to do so without being circumvented by what the FDA has enabled.
Absolutely. So, so important. I just again, I think it was the most egregious action that they took in removing that. As we talked about last week with Rosalie, not only does it increase the physical risks to women of complications, but it completely removes the opportunity for anybody in an abusive situation, any woman who's being trafficked to get help. For human trafficking victims, we know that the one area where they're most likely to get help and get out of that situation is an interaction with a medical professional. And now we've just taken that away completely. And we know that many women who are trafficked have repetitive forced abortions. There's many papers that document that. And there's certainly many women who have told their stories. And so this really is about protecting women from these harmful practices. And so we'll certainly be anxious to see the progress of where this case goes. And speaking of that, Gabriella, can you tell us where people can go to stay up to date on Rosalie's case, as well as to learn more about the crucial work that Alliance Defending Freedom is doing in many arenas, actually?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website, adflegal.org, and you can go on that website. We have a case page specific to this case. It's called State of Louisiana versus Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. We have Rosalie's story on there. She has her testimony in video form as well, where she tells her story, her painful trauma that she experienced in a live camera form. So you can go there. Those are available on YouTube. We have all of our case filings on there as well. So if you're interested in reading the case filings, and of course, as always, we ask for prayer over this case, prayer over Rosalie as she's boldly stepping out there and trying to give a voice to women who have experienced this kind of pain and hopefully never will have to experience this kind of pain because of the stand she's taking against the FDA.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll be sure that we put a link to you all's website in our show notes so people know where to go. Certainly, APLOG is so thankful for Alliance Defending Freedom. I often joke that I have you all on speed dial because you're so amazing. But you also do a lot of work to protect conscience rights of medical professionals like me who want to practice life affirming medicine and are medical trainees that oftentimes are in such vulnerable positions of people above them pressuring them to do things that violate their conscience or to kind of go along with the idea that induced abortion is healthcare and not to speak up. And you are going to be joining us at our national conference in Seattle in February to talk about some of the legal protections that medical professionals have. So we're really excited to have you join us there in sunny Seattle in February. But
I've never been. We'll see how sunny it is.
that's right. That's right. Hopefully, we'll have some good weather, but certainly it's a beautiful area of the country. But for anyone listening or watching who hasn't been to an APLOG conference before, we would highly encourage you to come. You will hear amazing speakers like Gabriella. We've got some leading researchers, bioethics experts. Professor Robert George from Princeton will be there with us. And so we're really excited to have everybody there. It'll be the last weekend in February in Seattle. And we still have our early bird discount is available for about another week and a half. So if you have not registered for that, go to conference.aplog.org. We'll put that in the show notes as well to register so you can come and meet Gabriella in person when she's there speaking with us.
We're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, Gabriella, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for the amazing work that you and your whole team at ADF are doing, and not only for defending our preborn patients, but also for standing up for women like Rosalie, who are really the victims of the abortion industry and now more and more the victims of the reckless actions of the FDA. And so we certainly are standing with you to hope that the FDA will correct its actions and instead do the job that they are meant to do, which is to ensure that the American public is kept safe from harmful and risky drugs. And so, so thank you so much to your team. Please convey our thanks to them.
Will do. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me on to talk about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. If you like this episode, please be sure to give us a like and a subscribe on YouTube, or if you're listening on a podcast app, please be sure to give us a 5-star review, as well as sharing this with your friends and your colleagues. It's so important that everyone hear Rosalie's story and understand what is truly happening in this country with abortion drugs. Also, if you want to help us continue to clarify in the midst of confusion and give accurate medical information for our patients and for the public, please join us either through joining as a member if you're a medical professional, or if you're not, you can join our team by donating to help support the crucial work that we're doing. We will see you on our next episode.